was really looking forward to reading The Work of His Hands by Sy Garte. I love books that tell the story of men and women's journey to faith. How someone moves from being an unbeliever to a believer in Jesus is so often such an amazing story. There's an old hymn, I love to tell the story, and I do love to tell the story, but just as much, I love to hear the story as told by others. So I was really looking forward to reading Sy Garte's story. But the book felt a little bit like a roller coaster ride for me, where I went from loving what I was reading and where the book was going one page to feeling like I was kind of being mocked and ridiculed on the next page. Although clearly this book wasn't written for a pastor like me, I kind of wish that in the midst of an awesome story of how he came to salvation, Sy might have given a little bit more charity to someone like me. Welcome to Rev Reads, your home for Christian book reviews from the perspective of a pastor. If you're new to the channel and want to stay engaged in insightful book reviews and book recommendations, please subscribe to the channel so that you can stay up to date on our most current reviews. If you're a regular to the channel, please like and share this video so that we can spread Sy's journey to Christ with more unbelievers who need to know about how he came to faith. First, the great. Sy begins by telling his own journey to faith in Jesus Christ, which, if I'm honest, nothing short of miraculous. When you read about his upbringing and his background, if I had to pick those who I would say would be least likely to believe in the gospel, he would go right in that camp of those least likely to believe. I think I would expect a militant Muslim to come to faith before a militant atheist scientist. The works of his hands with great skill and craft paints the picture of the journey that the author makes toward faith, alongside a description of the complexity of life to point us toward the design and beauty in this natural world that was crafted by our wonderful Creator. And if I'm honest, at times, some of what he writes in this book just goes right over my head, thanks to my own lack of knowledge in science. Now, I'm not going to claim to be a scientist here, and I will quickly admit that I don't know much of anything about genes, DNA, or principles of evolution. But even the things I couldn't fully understand, it was still great. I love learning about science that goes beyond my personal grade level. And I found it fascinating as he wrote on forces and physics and protons and chemical energy. This book is filled with tons of great instructions for the ignorant like me, and done in such a way that it shows both the passion and the knowledge of the author. My favorite quote shows some of the great instruction in this book and how it all points toward the glory and the wisdom of the Creator. Much of nature seems to fit a fractal model that I have entertained the idea that perhaps all of reality is fractal. This might be one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the computer age. We know now that our universe is complex far beyond what we used to think. The universe is also fractal, since this complexity is replicated in our galaxy, solar system, planet, town, house, body, individual cells, and macromolecules within those cells, all the way down to the basic particles and strings that somehow account for all matter and energy. This fractal reality is wondrous in revealing how what we even see as things that so often appear to be simple and basic, they're actually incredibly complex. And all of this points to a wonderful God who could understand it all and design it all for this world in which we live. And this is where Sy Garte and I sit in full agreement. But once he begins to argue for theistic evolution, on how God began the process of evolution for our world billions of years ago, that's where he just lost me. I fully respect Sy and other scientists who believe God used evolution to create the world. I just don't agree with them. But science is not my area of expertise. I welcome them, I respect their conclusions, I happily embrace them as brothers and sisters of Christ into the church, and I think we should join together as we learn how God made this world for his glory. But at the same time, I felt like portions of this book held young earth creationists as nothing but fools. That we were kind of like the unwanted rednecks that you would throw under the bus in order to impress your new city friends. Garte barely interacts with the book of Genesis in this book, as it appears, to me at least, to be kind of beneath his wisdom, and only really mentions it to discuss how it contradicts itself and how it would be ridiculous to take the authors as holding legitimate information as to how the world was made. He bent over backwards to find common ground with atheists who don't believe in God, and one of the ways he did this was by discounting his fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who believe that God created this world less than 10,000 years ago, but created it with the appearance of age. Now, I appreciate how he is reaching out to this lost world. I just wish that he could have done it in a way that wasn't at the expense of young earth creationists. And that led me to struggle a little bit with whether or not to recommend this book because I wholeheartedly disagree with his treatment of the book of Genesis. But at the same time, I do think it's healthy to interact with books and authors with whom one disagrees. And this is the third book over the last several years that I've read that argues for an old earth creation, where God used evolution to bring about the world as we know it. And out of those books, this is the best that I have read that looks at creation from that perspective. And so to that end, I would encourage people to read it because I think, one, you should read Sy Garte's testimony. Read about how he came to faith in Jesus Christ. Just go into it knowing what's coming. Learn some wonderful scientific lessons along the way, but I would also tell you to be on guard as he mixes evolutionary theory with what we find in the Bible and what it clearly reveals to us today. Because evolutionary theory and biblical truth don't always mix well together.